working on the Unit 4A review. Specifically, again, that's Unit 4A. We will eventually have a Unit 4B and a Unit 4C, but today we will be focusing on the Unit 4A review. Now you'll notice that this unit is a little bit different because there is a warm-up at the top. That's because we did have time in class to work on this packet. So hopefully you've kind of gone through the packet and done as much as you can. I will try to hit on every type of category in this packet, but again, this is 4 pages long, so without making a 2-hour long video, I will have to skip some stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and skip the warm-up for now. Example number 1. Let me straighten that out a little bit better. Example number 1, you'll notice that they only give us the points. So a couple of keywords that people were asking about in class is what is, write it as a set. What is a set? A set basically means all of your points as x comma y's. So kind of keeping that in mind, what are your x comma y's? I saw a couple strategies in class where people would find the points. So this one would be -3. And then down 4, so -4. Once they've put it in set notation, they then cross it out like that. That's a good way, especially when you're working with a map, to make sure that you're not writing a point twice. And then maybe you do the next point, that's -2, comma, +3, right? And then cross it out. Now I will say that in this section, some people asked in the past, does it matter which points you go with next? Like, is there a specific order that you want them written? No, there's not. You can really just jump around to any. So I could go to this one next. That's going to be at 2, comma, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, comma, -4, because it went down 4. That's fine. Just cross it out. And then maybe you want to jump over to this one and maybe jump over to that one. But yeah, it doesn't really matter where you're jumping around to as long as you end up writing all the points. So we have 3 more points to get through. I'm just going to go ahead. And again, please remember that this is your x-axis and this is your y-axis. Not necessarily saying you have to memorize that right now, but it is an important skill to know that the x is always left and right. We do that first. So if I'm going left 1, that's going to be at -1. And then I'm going up 2, that's going to be +2. This one, I don't move in the x direction at all. So my x is actually going to be 0. And my y is up 2, comma 2. And then the last point that I haven't done yet would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 over, and 1 up. Okay. Now, some key things to remember with mapping is number 1, don't repeat. So no repeats. Okay. And the second one is remember to draw arrows. So if I look at my numbers, I see a -3 in my x's, I see a -2, I see a +2, a -1, a 0, and a 4. None of those repeated. That's fine that it ran off. Don't worry about that. As far as the y values go, I have -4, I have 3, I have -4 again, so don't write it again. I have 2, I have 2 again, don't write it again, and 1. Then your arrows go and you say -3 to 4, -2 to 3, 2 to -4, -1 to +2. You have 0 to 2, and you have 4 to 1. A reminder as far as is this a function or not, remember that we are only looking at the x column and saying, do any of these numbers have 2 arrows? If they don't have 2 arrows, then it is a function. Anytime that something cheats, as far as the x column goes, that makes it not a function. So this is actually going to be a yes, it is a function. When you put it into the table, again, doing that real quick, -3, -2, 2, -1, 0, 4, and then they're matching pairs, -4, 3, -4, 2, 2, and 1. You can have repeats in this case because, again, you're just matching up the pairs. -3 goes with -4, things like that. So you're going to need those. As far as a function goes, whenever you're given a table, look for repeats in the x. We don't care about the y. You know, the y's are the guys. They can cheat. That's fine. But the x's are the ones that are the girls that don't cheat. And especially if this was a yes, this one's also going to be a yes. So down below, that's pretty much the same idea that you'd be doing here. Set notation, again, just writing them as x comma y's, having all of your points kind of going like this. Is it a function? Well, this one cheats. There's an x cheating, so that's going to be a no. For the second one, do the vertical line test. Does it fail the vertical line test? That's no, it doesn't fail the vertical line test, so it is in fact a function. If it fails, if it ever fails, that's when it is not a function. You failed the test, you are not a math student, something like that. Or if you fail your final, well, you are not going to graduate. I'm not saying in that case, but let's say in college, right? You take a final. If you fail the final really bad, you are not going to get that credit. So if you fail any of these, you are not a function. But if you pass, well, great, you're a function then. You get to be a function. Congratulations, you pass, right? So keep that in mind. And then the last one, again, looking to see if there's any repeats. Moving on to the next page, picking up my pace a little bit. These ones up here, these function notations, remember that if it's on the inside, all of these are on the inside, what that's really saying is that x equals 16. So come over here, and wherever you see an x, plug in a 16. I do stress to you that anytime you plug in a number, better safe than sorry, use parentheses. Because when I use parentheses here, I'm going to see that I have 5 times 16. That's going to give me 80. And then, of course, I'm going to have that plus 16. That one doesn't necessarily need parentheses, but again, better safe than sorry. Especially when you get up to ones that have a square like this. Because if I go to -3 and I write -3 squared, if you type that in your calculator, it will be wrong. You need to have the parentheses when you type it in your calculator. You have to have the parentheses, so be careful with that. Number 7 is the only one that doesn't come right out and say, what is x? There is no x in there. They don't tell me what x is, but they tell me that g of x equals 1. So that means I'm going to come over here to g of x, and I'm going to plug in a 1 and get 3x minus 1. Solve for x. So I add 1 to both sides. Divide by 3. That's going to give me 2 over 3 equals x. That's my answer. Okay. So again, they don't tell you what x is, but guess what? Our final answer, we found out what x is. So keep that in mind, the two different forms of when it's on the inside and when it's not on the inside. The ones down below, hopefully you don't need much explanation because we covered these a lot in class. Again, recommending that you always write that xy underneath. And depending on your personality, some people just like to, number these and they'll say number 1, number 2. That way, because I saw a lot of people that wrote it like this. Check this out. This is what people wrote. They would write -2 and they put a little base 2 there. Because a lot of times what I did in class was write it like this, right? And when I wrote it like that, people have been assuming that 2 has to go in the base of whatever my y2 is. That's incorrect. All I want is what is y2? Y2 is -2. Then I'm subtracting y1. What is y1? Y1 is just a 2. None of those little base numbers. Those base numbers are simply labels. It's like saying, hey, you're person 1, you're person 2. They are just labels. They have, just a placeholder, right? So that way I can decipher which one's my first point, which one's my second point. So please don't write those little base numbers. They're just little labels. And then on the bottom, you should have a 3 minus 1. Okay, so that's why I'm recommending possibly if you're one of those people that keeps getting confused, just number them and say, hey, this is going to be my point 1, point 2, and then go through and say xy, xy, always x comma y, then come over here, and the y2 means look at my second point and look at the y. That's a 4. Then subtract, go to your first point and look at the y. That's a 1. Then down here on the bottom, you have x2. So go to your second point and look at your x value. And then minus x1, look at your first point, look at your x value, 2. And then just do make sure that you simplify, take your time. 4 minus 1 should give you 3. 6 minus 2 should give you 4. That's your final answer. And I do want to remind you, especially with the double negatives, here's a negative. So if I go xy, xy, again, kind of thinking about this as your second point, this is your first point. Plug it into that formula, you're going to get 3 minus. Now be careful because this is a negative 2. So you are minusing a negative 2. So yes, you're going to get that double negative happening there. Or on the next one, you're going to have 4 minus what is, oops, I didn't mean 1. This should be a 1 actually. I read that backwards. So y, and then my x and my x, so minus 2. So in both of these, I actually have that double negative, and it's going to turn that into a plus sign. So please be careful, just because there's a negative over here doesn't mean that it accounts for this negative. You're going to end up getting 2 negatives, and that's going to turn it into a plus sign. Down below, it's talking, there's a word problem. Reminder with word problems, you're either going to get word problems with 2 numbers, in which case you're setting up that y equals mx plus b, because those 2 numbers are probably your m and your b. If you get 4 numbers, then you're probably going to be getting 2 points, where it's xy, xy. Okay, so read the problem and try to figure out, do you have 4 points or 2 points? Because that's where it's going to make the difference. This one is saying that in the first hour, okay, well, hours are numbers, so 1 hour, you sold 4 brownies. After 3 hours, you sold 13 brownies. So how many numbers do I have? I have a total of 4 numbers. Remember that x is usually a measure of time. And then y is usually whatever they're talking about. So that's my first point. Then I had 3 hours. Again, that's going to be your time, followed by 13 brownies. Once you have this properly set up, then you're pretty much doing what we did up here and plugging it into that formula. Down below it says write the equations for each of these graphs. It even comes right out and says hint, look for your m and look for your b, and then you're really just writing in this equation. So I remind you, what is the m? The m is always your slope. What is your b? The b is always the y-intercept. The y-intercept should actually be the easiest in my opinion, because it's really just saying look at the y-axis, where does it cross? It crosses at 0. The slope, on the other hand, can be a little more tricky because you're trying to figure out which 2 points to look at. Am I moving up? Am I moving down? What's actually happening here? So in my opinion, I always think of rise over run. First of all, that's really important. Rise over run, right? So I always look, where can I rise? Where's somewhere that I can rise? Well, I can go from this point to this point. That would be rising. So I'm going to look at it this way. I'm going to go up 2, okay? And then I'm going back 1. In order to get to this point, I have to go back 1. So it's going to be negative 1. So when I look at my rise, well, yeah, I went up 2. Great. Over my run, well, I went back 1, so that's negative 1. That's your slope. You can leave it like that. That's perfectly fine. If you want to try to convert that to a negative 2, that's also fine. No big deal. Even with number 15, again, usually your y-intercept, your b, is not very hard because it's just saying where does it cross. Looks to me like it crosses the y-axis at 2. And then as far as your m goes, you know, technically this point wasn't here originally, so I'm going to ignore it for now. You could, in theory, use it. That's fine. But I'm going to go ahead and just count my rise. So which one of these points? If I'm moving from this point to this point, that would be getting down. That would be climbing down. And a lot of you guys don't like the word rise. So the way that I think of it is always rise, no matter what. Figure out a way that you can get from this point to this point rising in some way, shape, or form. So here, if I draw it from here to here, I'm rising here. How much am I rising? I'm rising 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How much am I running? I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's forward, so it can be positive. Now 6 over 4 can be reduced to 3 over 2. And then just don't forget to write it as your y equals 3 over 2. A lot of people forget the x. Please do not forget the x. Now it is multiple choice, so hopefully you won't forget that x. But that's kind of where a lot of people made mistakes throughout this unit, is forgetting the x. Moving on to the next page, I skipped 14. A reminder, in 14 we talked about this. It only crosses the x-axis, so you only get an x. Very similarly, number 17 only crosses the y-axis, so you only get a y equals. And in this case, y equals 3, and you're done. 19 through 22, these were the ones where they basically ask you to count the slope. So if you always think about rise over run, or in some cases we talk about y over x, you start with the y. So figure out what's the change in the y. Well, from 7 to 15, I went ahead and added 8. So my y is going to be 8. And then what's my change over here? It looks like that's going to be going down 4. So I'm subtracting 4. Now this can be reduced because 8 divided by -4 gives me -2. But if you want to leave the fraction like that, if the directions don't say reduce, you don't have to worry about that. Number 19 has a star in it, and there were some questions about why. Well, the x should be pretty self-explanatory. You're adding 2. But on the y, a couple people look at this and they say, well, I went from 18 to 15, so I must be subtracting, and I'm subtracting 3. But remember, whenever it's negative, it usually does the opposite of things. I would rather be in $15 debt than 18, because if I'm in $18 debt, I'm more in debt than if I'm $15 in. So actually 15 would be if you added 3. So let's say, thinking of it this way, you started at $18 in debt, but now you're only $15 because you paid off $3. So this will come in handy, this type of thinking, especially when you start taking out loans, because if you start out taking a loan of $20,000, you're going to owe $20,000. You're going to be in debt $20,000. But if you pay off $1,000, well, guess what? Now you only owe 19. Now you're only $19,000 in debt, and that type of deal. So kind of keep that in mind, that it is important to understand the negatives. Down here in 23, 24, 25, these ones ask you to set up an equation first. So I'll do 23 with you, and then go ahead and move on. So 23 says Nora scored 14 goals so far in her hockey season. Okay, so there's a number. We probably should pay attention to it. She scores an average of 3 goals per week. The second you see that word per, you should be thinking that this is my M. That means this must be my B value. So if I'm thinking about this as a y equals mx plus b, just plug in what you got. So we have your m is 3, don't forget the x, plus our b, which was 14, and I'm done. You will have to think about, if it's talking about paying someone off, would that be a -14, things like that. But the point that I wanted to talk about here is part B. It says if Nora plays a total of 10 weeks, how many goals will she have scored? So ask yourself, is that going to be your X or your Y? And you're like, well, I have no idea. We didn't really label them, right? Well, if we go back into our statement here, it says he scores an average of 3 goals per week. So that means this M, this 3, goes with the week, because the 3 goals and a week were in the same section. So if I have the 3 and the X, that means that the 10 is probably the X. So again, make sure you use parentheses anytime you plug in. Okay, that gives me 30 plus 14, and that means that she's probably scored, 44 goals total. And I will say, again, this is multiple choice, but you should always have labels, especially when you're talking about word problems. Word problems means word answers. So I have a word in my answer. And then going to the last section, these were the ones where you are solving for y. We had this huge graphic organizer, and basically the end goal for no matter what we do is to always get the y by itself. So you can think of all the steps we talked about. Step number 1 was always distribute, things like that. So for this first one, I have distributing, so I can go ahead and distribute. That's 3x plus 3y equals 4. And again, thinking to ourselves, we need to get this y by itself. So in order to get this y by itself, I need to get rid of the 3x. Okay? And a lot of people are like, okay, that's fine, I can do that. But here's where it gets tricky. This 4 and this 3x have nothing in common, because this 4 doesn't have an x, so it can't be combined here. The -3 has an x, so it can't be combined here. These are 2 separate categories. It's like saying, oh, I want to take x and I want to add y. Well, x and y are different numbers. You can't assume that x is 4 and y is 4. They're different numbers. That's why they get different variables. So 4 and 3x are different numbers. Okay? So even like way back when, if we had 4 plus, x, there's nothing you can do because you don't know what x is. So you can't combine them. So just kind of keep that in mind. If it has a variable, be very conscious of what you got, And then remember that the last step is always divide, divide, divide. So dividing everything by 3. And I will say that on the answer key, someone pointed out to me in class, and I may or may not change it, but depending on the test, I do want to point out that the answer key is slightly errored in this problem because the 2, I forgot to multiply, at least in the answer key, multiply the 2 by the 2, which would actually give you 4 in this case. And then here's where it kind of branches off. So in the answer key, you'll notice, let me show you. You'll notice that there are 2 options on how you want to do this. So the first option, you'll notice that I always say get rid of any y's on the right and send them over to the left. So that's what I did here. I sent the y over. Now it's the only y, so it can't be combined with anything else. So I have negative 5y plus 2x minus 4. Then I went ahead and got rid of the 2x by subtracting. I got rid of the 4 by adding, brought it over to the other side. So here's my negative 2x plus 4 and my negative 5, and then went ahead and divided. Got my answer. That is the very long way around. And here's the cool thing. So we talked about before that if you have something like this, a couple of you guys have asked this in class, what's the difference between 4 equals x and x equals 4? Nothing. Both of them say that x is equaling 4. Doesn't really matter whether it says 4 equals x or x equals 4. No matter what, it's still saying that if I have an equation, something like this, I am saying that wherever I see x, I'm plugging in a 4. Okay? So it doesn't matter what side the variable ends up on as long as it's by itself. So actually the shortcut method would be saying, well, look at the problem. Look at the original problem. This, I would have to FOIL. So I got 2x minus 4 equals 5y. But if I'm trying to get y by itself, the best thing that I can do is get rid of this 5. So I can divide, right? And then I get this 2 over 5x minus 4 over 5 equals y. Well, all of a sudden, y is by itself. That was the whole goal of this problem, and therefore I'm done. You could leave it like this, even if you wanted to. Just leave it like that. I would give you full credit. That's fine. Now, since this is a multiple choice test, it will most likely be putting the y on the other side, but that's okay because all you're really doing is flipping it. So I send the y over here, the 2 over 5x over here, negative 4 over 5 here. Nothing changes. I'm really just mirroring it. Okay, I still, here's 4 fingers. I still have 4 fingers, that type of deal. So just kind of keep that in mind. And then the rest of these problems, you can kind of look through. The special thing with 30 is please remember to combine like terms when possible. It makes your life a lot easier. So 3x plus 2x gives you 5x. So just remember to combine like terms. Again, the test is multiple choice, so that should be somewhat helpful to kind of help you recognize them as long as you kind of know the gist of what you are doing. So good luck on the test. Goodbye.